So now I can move for the last section of my talk to the legacy of hope. In every society after a genocide, you've got people who want to look the other way, who are not interested, couldn't be bothered, got other things to do, more concerned about their family life or whatever it might be, or their businesses. And there are others who actually really are interested and would like to do something. Let me give you a quick guided tour of 600 years of Polish Jewish history that can still be seen, thanks to all those people who are concerned citizens and want to restore the memory of a great Jewish past over 800 years. So we start with the 15th century. The 15th century. If anybody thinks that Jews lived in mud huts in Poland, they've got another thing coming when they see these pictures. I know that the Fiddler on the Roof had a very big success here, but there was other kinds of Jewish life that existed in Poland other than mud huts. We start with this. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a synagogue still surviving from the 15th century. When I say 15th century, I mean 15th century. So that is what, 600 years ago? Yes? In the 1400s, right? That's from the outside, and that is from the inside. It's a fully functioning, it's now a museum, yes, restored by the help of the City Council of Krakow, and it's now fully functioning as a Jewish museum. Look at that. That's the 15th century. Let me show you a synagogue from the 16th century. This is the synagogue of the Ramah, still standing, still functioning, still a functioning synagogue. The Ramah, otherwise known as the Moshe Isserles, was the person who wrote the main commentary to the Shulchan Aruch, or the Code of Jewish Law, and all his comments, which are intended for the Jews of Poland, are still valid to this day. And any educated, and particularly religiously educated Jew, must study what the guy who made this synagogue wrote about every aspect of Jewish life in his commentary to the Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah, and the cemetery immediately outside. You want to know what it looks like inside? There you are. That is a functioning synagogue. It's small. There isn't a large Jewish community, and that is very, it's got a lot of vibes in there, given its age and its importance. That's the 16th century. Now I'll show you a synagogue from the 17th century. Take a look at this. This was designed by an Italian architect, also in Krakow. They hired the best architects. When that synagogue was built, all the Jews lived in wooden houses in the area of Kazimierz in Krakow, but they built these magnificent buildings. Just look at that, with the Hebrew inscriptions. This is the ladies' gallery. They have a direct view onto the Ark where the Torah scrolls are stored. It was a piece of good architecture, so that the ladies who were in that gallery could look straight at the Ark without having to have their vision impeded by looking at the menfolk. Well, they can look at men, that's all right. But they should have a chance to connect directly with the source of the religious thing. That is the 17th century. Let's have a look at the 18th century. What do you think about that? That synagogue was restored by the local museum. It's in the town of Weinzut, in Yiddish Landshut. There is a museum nearby which helped with that restoration, together with a vodka, the local vodka factory. Why the local vodka factory? Because like anywhere else, commercial enterprises want to show their civic pride and to contribute something to the community, so the local vodka company offered some slice of its profits to help restore what they regarded as their synagogue. It's the synagogue in their town, i.e. their synagogue. No, there's no Jews in the town. There's no synagogue services here. They wanted to restore that as a tribute to the Jews, the history of their city in which the Jews were so important. Notice the inscriptions all the way around the wall, influenced by Reb Menachem Mendel of Rimanov, whom we saw before. And notice also the tabernacle in the middle. Here you can see the restored tabernacle. Reb Menachem Mendel of Rimanov synagogue had that tabernacle fully ruined, but there you can see what it would have looked like at its heyday. What I like about this synagogue architecture, which, by the way, never succeeded in traveling across the Atlantic, you'll never see, American synagogues looking as beautiful as this. I mean, I'm not a synagogue architect, so I can be rude about American synagogue architects if I feel like. Just look at that. That is, I like the softness of the green pastel. I find it quietens you down. It doesn't. Well, you may say you want it in strong reds to excite the passions. Maybe that's also perfectly all right in a place of worship. But their idea was to have it soft and quiet and gentle. And I must say that it's very interesting. You don't find this anywhere else. You have to go to Poland to see something like this now. There's nowhere in America you can, unfortunately, you can go and see it. Have a look at this from the outside. This is a synagogue in Lesko. It is, you'll hear people saying, especially Jewish people, and especially Holocaust survivors, and especially Holocaust survivors from Poland, telling you, oh, Polish anti-Semitism. Okay, I'm not there to argue. I'm not born before the war. I wasn't born in the Holocaust, so I can't comment. But what I can say is that when you see a synagogue like that in Poland, you can see that the people who built that were not feeling they're going to be going anywhere. They're not bothered about anti-Semitism. So, you know, I mean, these guys are absolutely convinced we're here to stay. We contribute to the local environment. That tower on the right-hand side is part of the local defences of the city. So the Jewish, just like you have Jewish fire brigades, you have Jewish civil defence. They went up the steps in that tower and they looked out over to see if attackers were coming. So the synagogues were also part of the local civil defence structure of these towns. It's very interesting to see this. I'm not saying there was no anti-Semitism in Poland. Absolutely not. Of course, like with any. I mean, I come from England. We have had riots with our Muslims in Bradford. I mean, that doesn't mean to say every Muslim and every white person is always in a state of tension. Yeah, there are some moments of tension. There are sometimes a riot. There's sometimes houses get burnt down. Even people get hurt. Maybe a few people actually get killed. I'm not speaking about 9/11, but I'm speaking about ordinary, everyday life between local populations. Certainly there was friction. Certainly there were moments. But you can see the other side of the coin here, that these guys were perfectly comfortable with where they were. Now this is the 19th century. Now we have Reformed and Progressive Judaism. Women up in the gallery there. It's for the doctors and the lawyers and the dentists and the educated intelligentsia. They had their own synagogue with sermons in Polish now, not in Yiddish anymore. Their children went to the university. 25%, or maybe around about 25% of all the university students at the Jagiellonian University of Krakow, which is the oldest university in the city, going back 600 years, 25 by 1895. Of course, there was anti-Semitism at the university. There was numerous clauses, namely a quota, and the Jews were forced to sit at the back. That was 1935, when they had a very nasty anti-Semitic government in pre-war Poland. But prior to that, these fellows, there were so many of them in the university and having equality with the Polish that the rabbis were afraid that they would all assimilate so fast that they'd all fall off the edge and never come back to Judaism. So there was poverty too. It was not all wealth. There was poverty, and there were villages. Let me show you the villages. Here you can see proof of village life, if ever you wanted to see proof of village life. This is Bobowa. These countryside cemeteries prove that Jews lived in such places. It's not, you just see the Hebrew inscriptions on them. You can prove that there are no Jews now, there are no Jews in any of these places really, except, as I say, 10 in the whole of Poland. But they used to live in villages like that. This is Mszana Dolna. Now, maybe for a Californian going up Tura Boulevard, you'll see scenery like that. I don't know. If you drive out to Oxnard or whatever it is, you could see that kind of scenery. But in Poland, this is village life, really village life, a Jewish cemetery in such a setting. It's very interesting to see that. I came to this small village, and there was a cow right outside the local synagogue there in a very small village where there only 132 people lived in 1939. 132 Jews, I'm sorry, lived in 1939. They built this small synagogue. And I said to Chris, the photographer, I said, you get out to this village and take a picture, and if you can possibly get a cow in the foreground, and it would be really, I'd be really delighted. And he got there, and indeed, probably, I don't know if it was the same cow, but there was a cow, and he got it in there. This was the village synagogue. This one also had only 175 Jews in 1921. Look what the synagogue they built there, Wielkie Oczy, really amazing. So it's a small village community, but the Jews really put their effort into an important synagogue. And inside it is an amazing plaque which says that in the middle of the First World War, that synagogue burnt down because it was on the front line where they were fighting the First World War. The whole synagogue burnt down, and there was some Jew from this village of Wielkie Oczy who'd come to live in New York. So they wrote to him and they said, the synagogue's burnt down. They said, you must be very wealthy now, you're in New York, you see. They didn't know whether he was or he wasn't. Anyway, he decided to dig his hands deep into his pocket, sent the money back to Poland in 1922 to rebuild the synagogue, and they were so delighted that they rebuilt the synagogue. They put a special plaque to thank him for rebuilding the synagogue, and they said in the last line, it says that this will be this will be a tribute to you for having restored our synagogue ad hador ha'acharon, till the end of time. Poor fellow, Mr. Gutwirt from Wielkie Oczy, he came back to see his restored synagogue, but 15 years later, Wielkie Oczy was abandoned the second time when the Germans came and took all the Jews out, never to come back. But the synagogue is still there, and the plaque is still there. So a lot of emotions when you come to see all these places. It's complicated. This is a synagogue which was where they got people, a small Jewish community. Once again, I've got 343 people lived here in 1900. It's a small place called Niebilec, not far from Rzeszów. 50% of the population of this village were Jewish, and they commissioned, these 350 people commissioned an artist to paint their ceiling for them. Look how nice. And they put the trompe-l'œil around the top there, and they got Hebrew inscriptions, a picture of Jerusalem and all the rest of it. All the Jews of Niebilec were taken away and murdered, none to come back. So the synagogue stood there, and the local community decided to use it as their library. And it's now their local library, and it kind of coexists somewhat uneasily with it being a synagogue. I know it's the library. I know it was restored because the restorations were done a little bit clumsily, and the person obviously did it with a full heart, but made mistakes in Hebrew. So we know they really made an attempt to restore it. They're proud of their synagogue, but there we are. It is that's how it is. Here is a military cemetery. Jews who fought in the army, First World War, their own military cemetery. Did you ever hear about that? Jewish military cemetery in Poland for people who died in the First World War, and another one. This is in Bochnia. And here, most interestingly, these are tombstones. If I asked you to guess when these tombstones were made, you already know. They are I told you they're 20th century. They're from 1938 and 39. So these are also Jews who were killed during the Holocaust. These were not only the Reform progressive university professors and deputy mayors, these were people like this. And if you want me to explain what are all these symbols on the tombstones, well, it's very interesting. The lion symbolizes being strong as a lion to do the will of God. Very interesting inscriptions and tombstones. So it gives you an idea. Just a mixed bag, small private prayer house. Not only big synagogues, what they're called in Yiddish shtibel, means a small private prayer house for a family or a small group usually in an urban or semi-urban environment. That's in Dąbrowa Tarnowska. And this is another shtibel, this time with a Hebrew inscription on the outside. This is from 1912. Very rare to find Hebrew inscriptions in Poland. Why? Because the Germans forbade it. Hebrew inscriptions were considered not kosher under the Germans, so they had to remove them all. So they're very rare. And that's one which still survives in Krakow. This is another one also in Krakow. It says that in Polish on the top and Hebrew underneath, this was a trade school for orphans. Orphanages were a big feature, as we've already discussed. This, I bet you nobody can tell me what this was. This is in the city of Tarnów. What kind of Jewish institution do you think that was? Any offers? Let me tell you, put you out of your misery. It's not a synagogue, and it's not a Jewish community center, and it's not a cinema. It is a mikveh, which is a ritual place where ladies go to bathe themselves after they've had their period, to ritually clean themselves by water, which is a tradition common to Jews and Muslims and many other religions in the ancient and modern Near East. and look how beautifully they made their bathing pool in the city of Tarnów.
What year is that?
1912. I think it's 12 or 1913. You mean year it was erected? Yes, 1912 or 1913. For students of architectural history, this is very interesting, why they chose this kind of oriental kind of style. But that was fashionable all over Central Europe in those days, right before the First World War. This is an interesting building. Also, I think about a little earlier, I think about 1908 or 07, it's from the city of Yaroslavl, where they had artisans who had their own cultural center and bank, a lending bank. You have to remember that 30% of the Jews before the war were artisans, that is to say, watchmakers, clockmakers, wig makers, tailors, hatters, tinsmiths, butchers, bakers, shoemakers. 30% roughly of the Jews were in that kind of trade. And therefore, if you look at what they built for themselves, their centers, you can get an idea of their economic strength. This was in the city of Yaroslavl. This is an interesting picture of how Jews lived in the urban courtyards. They lived around courtyards, not in apartment blocks that we know from the United States. Courtyards often connected with an outside staircase or an outside balustraded walkway, as you can see. Those of you who know Schindler's List may remember this scene. He used this to film part of the ghetto in that film.